All right. We just got done with week two historic Pauper ladder, so I thought I would take a quick second, do an updated deck tech. I did one for the last ladder we ran, mono green in, so a little while ago. I think there might have been one in between that one and this one, and then also historic Pauper or historic and explorer Pauper ladders. A lot of new cards have come out. Nothing that I think really impacted green in terms of green cards that we got. Just things kind of changed in the overall landscape. We still haven't come across anything running some of the new cards like Ethereal Armor, which I'm kind of interested to see on how we do against that, considering I don't really have a very well thought out sideboard yet. Um, but there was a shift, I think, that kind of Green was moving away from the original concept I had. So the original concept was really pushing Biograph. And you can see I still have a couple here in the sideboard. Still a decent card, still a 5/4 for 2 under the right circumstances, and it's a perfectly serviceable turn 5 play. But terror decks are on the rise. It's a 5/5, and something that just trades straight up for it um, isn't always the best, especially when people are going to be, potentially running unexpected fangs or things to beef it up a little bit to put it out of range of you. So you really need to max out and go all in, I think, on Gnarling Colony. It's the best bang for your buck at green. If you are now playing on a typical, turn 1 mana accelerator, turn 2 mana accelerator, turn 3, you've got yourself a 6/6 trampler, and that outclasses pretty much anything in the format. Certainly, you need to be wary of death touch cards, removal, things like that, and that's why we have a pretty robust suite of protection spells. So not too much has changed. We are still looking at Elvish Mystics, 4 copies of those. Llanowar Elves, 4 copies of those, and I think that's really what moved this deck from Biograph deck, which is where the deck originally stemmed from when I only had 4 Llanowar Elves and Mystic hadn't been printed yet. We had to use other ways, to get Biograph out quickly, and that was that was a little bit more valuable. You couldn't rely on that early mana acceleration being there consistently. Now you can. I mean, it's more common to see, turn 1 Elf, turn 2 Jewel Thief or Migratory Greathorn. Your mana keeps accelerating. You're still putting out big threats on the board. And as long as you maintain that board control, you can just keep being aggressive. So yeah, we've got 8 mana dorks at the 1 slot. Rosethorn Halberd started off as kind of a maybe-ish card because it's kind of a close replica to Rancor. Clearly not as good because it lacks the trample, but it's not bad. It really has been doing a lot of good work, and I think now with the most recent change, which you'll see in a second if you haven't already, I think it really earns its slot in here because it does give a nice little pump on some things. There are no humans in the deck, so it's always going to be able to attach to things. Late game, spending 5 really isn't that big of a deal, but adding an extra 2 1-for-1 in a deck that's already got some pretty big dudes is pretty good. And then we run with the 4 main deck snakeskins, getting bigger, protecting our guy, very good. So here's where our biggest changes. So Groffs are out of the main, a couple go into the sideboard, and we replace it with Vault Scourge. We found that we're very vulnerable to flyers, and we want to get some sort of a flying threat up there, and the 1/1 may not look that great. It also does give us a little lifelink if we're playing against a deck that's a little quick, some sort of burn style deck or anything that can go really quickly on reducing our life total before we can get rolling. That's usually not the case, but it is nice to have here. But Vault Scourge is actually really good in this deck. Again, it's a non-human, so it gets its little buddy Greathorn, which we were just putting on our elves. Now we can put that on a 1/1 flyer, turn it into a 3/4, pumps from Bannerhide Kashak, Snakeskin Veil pumps. This thing can get big quick, and do a lot of damage. So I think that's a really good slot. We saw in the game that we played, it was taken out pretty quickly. The person running it identified as a threat, took it out at the right time, and made sure that that thing didn't get going. And that was a good play on their part. It is certainly fragile. It does leave you open to certain spots where you might have a couple mana elves and Vault Scourge on the table, and you might be momentarily vulnerable to a sweeper. I think it's willing to take that risk to get things going and really get your deck rolling with this guy. It's obviously not as not as threatening as seeing that turn 2 5/4, but people can chump block the Groff until you get something that gives it trample and gets it going, really gets it going. And it's not necessarily something that you want to always upset your mana acceleration. Sometimes you find yourself in a trap where you commit to that Biograph and then deck goes dry, you don't see extra lands, and you're kind of stuck at that. You got 2 mana, but everything costs 3. So you have to be a little careful and stuff like that. I don't find myself in that situation often, but it does happen, and you don't want to force yourself into positions where you might stumble. So that is the new swap. And then we went to the 4th copy of Gnarlid. I was at 3, but now we're going with the full 4, and so I'm much more confident in putting it out there as just a 2/2 and being okay with that, not just holding it all the time. There were times where I think I was missing opportunities, letting opponents get back into games where I was kind of holding it up because I really wanted to get that 6/6 bomb, or putting out the 6/6 bomb and exposing it to a spell that could kill it. We don't have to worry about that anymore. So I think with the 4 copies, that helps a little bit. And then we had initially 2 Tameo safekeepings to accompany the Snakeskin Veils in the main. We took out the 2 safekeepings in the main, moved those over to the board. We're running 1 Gaia's Gift. I think this card is actually really good. I don't like it in multiples, though. I don't really want to have too many of these, because that 2 mana does get to be a little bit much, but you get so much out of what it's giving you. I mean, a 1/1 counter, hexproof, indestructible, trample, reach. I mean, it gives you everything. It gives you a lot of sneaky little lines where somebody thinks they're just chump blocking a Great Horn or a pumped up Knoll Hunter, and then all of a sudden it has trample mid combat. So that is a nice little trick, an extra protection, and it kind of bolsters your protection suite a little bit. And then of course our little workhorse Knoll Hunter, he's not the greatest, and you'll see, I think, if you watch the last game that I played this week, if you don't have other things to kind of get it going, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to take a long time to get there, but he works. He's still a threat. If you ever slip on him for a second, he can get big real fast, and you can't let him get out of control. So when you've got so many threats that can get out of control quickly, and that are so cheap, I think that's great. We still run 3 main deck ran throughs. Jewel Thief is at our 3 spot. Great Horn you saw earlier typically comes in at a 3 cost because we want to get that extra land and improve our elf or improve our Vault Scourge. And then Kashak, it's a solid 4/4 for 4. It pumps, it has scavenge, nice upside. This might be able to trim down to 3 and leave you 1 extra slot for something else, but I mean, I'm not messing with it right now. I think it's fine. I don't know that there's too much more tweaking in the main deck that needs to be done. Mana base, I like. There's no real reason for snow lands over normal lands. I think the only reason they were there is the deck originally started off having Icehide Troll, and if that's something you want to explore too, go for it. I just don't really think it's that relevant with the approach of this deck, right? I'm using cheap threatening creatures, protecting them with cheap spells, whereas the Ice Hide is a little bit more of a mana investment. You're going to get an indestructible dude, but it is more susceptible to certain kinds of removal, -1/1 counters, not have hexproof. You still end up having to have things that you don't want to target anyway, and you got to sink a ton of mana, and you aren't allowed to kind of keep growing your board. So that wasn't the approach I wanted to run with it. Not to say it's bad, it just doesn't really work in this deck. And then the sideboard, it's still kind of a hodgepodge of hot mess. We do still want to gross because we want things where if we are not facing an opponent that is very aggressive, isn't putting a lot of creature threats out there, we want to have as many options to be aggressive quickly as possible. So, turning on a 5/4 on turn 2, great. That's something we want to accelerate into quickly and make sure that we're putting pressure on the board as fast as possible. So we put a couple of those in the board, put extra fight spells, a few life goes ons for a little extra life game, all the Tameo safekeeping. So you'll see this week, I think that really helps us in control matchups where we're going to be facing a lot of removal that you can bring to bear. 9 protection spells in addition to a deck that has a 30 plus creature count. So you should be able to overwhelm their amount of counter spells, removal. Just make sure you're critical, thinking about it critically when you make the decision on what to protect. Sometimes the choices are obvious, sometimes they aren't, but you start to see the lines pretty quickly. Line up the shot is in there just to make sure that we've got some sort of protection against a flyer. And again, I don't have more of them. I need more wild cards. I think it's one that probably at this point would be my go-to in the sideboard to cover those things. Takes care of problematic enchantments, which I mentioned earlier, Ethereal Armor. That's a card that could put something out of control really fast. So having something that allows me to straight up deal with a flyer or deal with an enchantment or an artifact, I think covers a lot of basis, and it's not a dead card against a matchup like Turbo Fog, whereas like things like Ram Through's completely dead. Anything that's not pumping my creature or accelerating and being aggressive is kind of irrelevant. So if I throw something in like this and I just want to draw a card for 1 mana, it's going to dig me through a little bit faster. So it's not entirely dead. It's not embarrassing to throw in there if you need to get a little extra oomph to push through quickly. Thwart the Enemy, I still think this is a great card. I think it's improving. This was one that I think people knew about but weren't really using because it wasn't it just wasn't matching up well in the meta that people are having, because everything was kind of equal. You're getting these really I guess you weren't finding these opportunities where you could create lopsided trades. We didn't see it this week with the deck, but we could see situations in week 1 where you're going to get people to commit to double, triple blocking, making all these decisions where they're willing to trade away 4 guys to remove 2 of your big guys, or 3 guys to remove 1, and and that will really set your board state back. And if you can come out of that trade without your board state getting touched, it puts it really puts a death nail in the coffin, so to speak, at that moment when they're expecting the removal of your biggest threats, or they invest so much in bringing something down and they don't. It's really a kind of a backbreaking play. I'd love to be able to pick up a third one of those maybe and put that in there, but yeah, sideboard needs a lot of work, I think. But overall, I'm really happy with the main deck, and mostly the big thing that I worry about is more control decks with heavy removal. So I'm really committed to that in the sideboard, being able to have, like I said, 9 spells that protect your guys, and so many creatures. I think that's a really solid approach to beating that kind of a metagame. It's done well so far. I think there's places where I'd probably beat, but I can't really address those until I get more wild cards to resolve things. So hopefully you guys like this. You can take it out for a spin, see how it does for you, make changes as necessary. There's a lot of different variants of green that you can run now. Value green is still out there. Other different aggressive approaches, proliferate decks. We've got the new set coming out that'll change a few things. So green, mono green or green based decks that have a complementary color or colors are really good. I hope you like them. Hope you like the deck, and see you soon.